In a way, artists, hackers, good investors, they all share something, which is they are really good in tapping into someone else's brain. One of the things we did, my team did, was they killed me. I can implant a memory in your brain and change your memories. I can go into your dreams and change something, and you wake up and you're going to have a different experience. I think that the faster and you are to understand that you're ignorant, the better you are in being a scientist.
Welcome. I'm Professor Rob Wolcott of the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. I'm here today at 1871, one of the world's leading technology ecosystems where the future is invented. And I have the privilege to meet with one of my good friends and colleagues at Kellogg, Professor Moran Cerf. Moran, I like to say, is your run-of-the-mill neuroscientist, hacker, and master storyteller. Moran, you have to explain for us how you ended up with this sort of career.
I think that it's like most choices in life, random sequence of events with no planning that you try to weave into a story in hindsight.
And most strategy is created ex post facto.
Exactly.
After we see what happened, we decide we had a strategy. So, but to go up to the meta level, what interests you most?
I think the question I always find most interesting is humans' behavior, and specifically their psychology, what drives their behavior. No matter what career I had, this was the kernel of what I cared about and the topic that I kind of tried to explain or understand.
So I mentioned briefly you were a hacker. Then you decided to shift into neuroscience. Meanwhile, you enjoy storytelling. You're quite good at it, I must say. When you were a hacker, how did this notion of understanding human behavior come into your activities as a computer coder?
So ultimately, I think that hacking, at the heart of it, is understanding people. It's trying to put yourself in the mind of someone else and say, what would Rob not think of that if I knew how he thinks, I could use against him? So Rob programmed the Facebook login page, but he assumed that the usernames are going to be up to 1,000 characters long. Rob would never think that something could be longer than that. I know how he thinks. He wouldn't think about that. I'm going to make a password that's 2,000 characters long and then break into Facebook. I'm going to look at Rob and I would assume that he's getting tired at 6 p.m. and whatever part of the website that he programmed at 6 p.m. is going to be less carefully done than the 10 a.m. one. So I'm going to find this spot and try to attack this first. So knowing how you think and being empathetic to other people and really understanding their psychology is the key to being a good hacker.
And this sounds a lot like what great traders, for instance, in the markets do with behavioral science to try and whether they do it scientifically or they do it intuitively. It sounds very similar.
Yeah, I think that in a way, artists, hackers, good investors, they all share something, which is they are really good in tapping into someone else's brain. They can put themselves in someone else's mind and think like them. And then everything becomes really easy. I think Picasso's talent, beyond being able to draw what he sees, was also to be able to close his eyes and just think about millions of people out there and imagine how they would respond to this painting and then do it.
So you think, and maybe we don't know for sure, but you think that Picasso actually had his audience in mind when he was creating art, or do you think he was just creating what was inside?
I think that we can't separate them anymore. So
you can't separate them anymore.
The world is in our mind, whether we like it or not. The most rebellious hacker out there actually still carries society with them. There's a saying that the Queen of England takes everyone with her to the bathroom, even if she's alone, because she knows how we respond. She knows what her mom thinks about her, what her dad thinks about her, and this is even when she's alone in her mind. I think that their brains and our brains are never alone anymore. We live in an ecosystem of brains, and whether we actually have a brain in front of us that talks to us, or whether I'm alone, your brain is still somehow with me by the memories that you distill in me, by the language that I talk to myself that is infused by your ideas. So we're no longer alone in the world.
So, and thank goodness in many ways, but so back to the notion of hacking. Do you believe it's possible to be a great hacker based solely on exceptional technical skills?
No, I think if you had to trade between technical skills and the ability to think like others, I would choose thinking like others, because the programming tools right now are so they're not easy, but they're accessible. You can find a lot of things in black boxes that you can use without knowing how it works.
Right, right. So the interaction with computers is becoming more and more abstracted away from the underlying language of the computer.
I think the best hackers I still know aren't the best programmers I know. They are just really, really good in having a good view of the entire system and kind of hearing how it works and say, you know what, it doesn't make sense to me. No way the login page can check this data point any given time. I bet someone forgot something, let's try there. And then what they try is usually, it's like being a good magician. Some magicians have this amazing skill where they can actually use sleight of hands to do things, but I think that the best magicians just know how you think and they just know how to trick you without knowing all the magic of sleight of hands. They just know how you think.
Sleight of hand is really sleight of human.
Exactly. And I think that's why I think that psychology of humans is at the heart of hacking, neuroscience, storytelling. You kind of have to see how people tick, understand how the mind works, and then use it against itself.
So, Moran, given the increasing abstraction away from the core language of the computer, programming environments get more and more even like natural language interaction. The interface becomes more natural. I'm going to go out on a limb here. If we play that movie out, is it possible that coding itself by the end of the century could become like knowing ancient Greek? I mean, there's a pride, and for a couple centuries, a true intellectual had to know ancient Greek, but for a long time, it really didn't matter that much. Today, it's not even a requirement. Could coding become like ancient Greek?
I think it will be. I think it already becomes like that. So when I was a kid, not long ago, we used to program in zeros and ones, literally. We played with power and electricity, and we played with assembly, and we knew what's going on there, and we understood computers really at the level of the kernel of the computer. No one in the world right now programs like that, and I bet not a lot of programmers that are fantastic actually know how it works. They know that you type a command that prints a string on the screen, and it happens. They have no idea what happens behind the scene. And this becomes more and more abstract in the same way that many companies have managers who know that the company works, but they have no idea what actually happens. They kind of send the instruction to some subordinates, do this, and somehow it happens, but they have no idea how it actually propagates. The same way that a lot of us fly airplanes not even knowing what's going on between the wind, turbulence. It becomes the world. It becomes so complex that individuals don't understand a lot of it. Computers kind of grew up with my generation, so we still have people like me who remember how it was when it started and how it is right now, and we see the gap, but it's going to be like dinosaurs who actually, will tell you stories about things.
Which makes me a little bit concerned that we're putting so many hopes in our educational system. If young people learn how to code, somehow they're going to have a job for life. And that seems, there's a value in understanding how computers work and how code works and what tools are at my disposal. But perhaps people are putting too much faith in the notion of learning to code.
Generally, there's, I think, a problem that's bigger than just coding, which is whatever we teach kids right now is going to be useless by the time they get to use it. So that's a bigger problem. Coding is a problem in and of itself because it is something that gets farther and farther removed from the actual building blocks. At the same time, I think we still teach kids math, knowing that they would never use it in the real world. They would just get prices automatically, and it somehow gets used still because it's the building block of a lot of things. I think coding thinking is going to still be relevant. So I would still teach kids how to code, even though they probably won't ever use it, and they won't really use the code that they learned. They kind of would learn how to think systematically, how to think algorithmically, how to think in linear and parallel processing. So they would know something that's going to be relevant, even though I'm sure, like you said, that they won't need to really code, like we did, for I equals 1 to 20.
So coding, in a sense, becomes like math, the foundation for many other things we do.
And like English, and you just need to know how it works so you can follow it.
Great. So I want to shift back to your life as a hacker. How did you become a hacker in the first place? Was that a lifelong dream, or you stumbled into it?
So I think like most hackers of my generation, we started with computers. So I was a kid when computers were almost becoming a personal thing that you can buy at home. Suddenly, you can buy for a lot of money.
What was your first computer? Mine was the Trash 80, the TRS-80 by Radio Shack.
The XT. I'm sorry, the XT was the very first one that the PC XT was the first one, but I actually, I had a Amiga and the Commodore. I had all of them, but I didn't.
Commodore 64.
Yeah. But all those were really just like a cassette that you put. You didn't really get to interact with it. It wasn't a PC. It was like having a video. You just a VCR. You put a tape and it plays. You don't really play. With the PC XT, I'm talking age 7. I actually could interact. I could type a command and something happens. This is roughly the same time where the ability to copy software became a thing. Like you had hard drives that were diskettes. You can actually copy magnetic things. This meant that you had copyright and copy protected things. And if you wanted to play Mario 1, but you didn't have the money to afford it, then the only way to do that was to somehow find a way to copy Mario 1 from your system to my system and to break
You're
the
talking
code.
about stealing. Basically.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
but
This
you've
was-
overcome that part of your life.
Yeah.
So your hacking started by the desire to play games and do things you wanted
Play
to do.
games, add one more life to Mario. I think that in the very early time when I started, there wasn't really internet, but there was BBS, bulletin board services, so you can actually dial up and connect to another computer. And this required very technical, like you had to really like play tones on a computer.
Something for the younger generation, something called a modem
Yeah.
on a phone line. You might not recognize either of those terms. But so then you became a professional hacker later. And what did that look like?
So I think that the gap for me was that I was raised in Israel and I had this talent of knowing how computers work and how to toy with them. And this talent was relevant to the Israeli army. So at age 18, I get called by the Israeli army and they say, if you have this skill, the Israeli intelligence would really value that, become part of us. And I joined the army and I kind of was part of this elite intelligence unit that suddenly enriched my life because I saw dozens of people like me. So they got all of them and suddenly there were a lot of us sitting together and really knowing how to hack and teaching each other. 3 years into my army service, I was both really well trained in how to hack, but also surrounded by people that later on would become my peer group. So when I had a problem, I knew who to call and I knew that someone else could do that. So when I finished the army, age 21, I was basically destined to be a hacker because me and all my colleagues just went, started a company and...
Then you started a business as a hacker as a service to society, also as a way to make money, but really as a service to society, hacking into banks and then telling them about it and saying, hey, you've got a problem and I think you need to fix it. So you were building this business. What is one of the most interesting things, interesting, unexpected, that happened to you during your days as a hacker that you're allowed to talk about?
So I think that there's many anecdotes that you can imagine come from being a hacker as a profession, from interactions with the people whose money you stole in the order of millions and find that you have to find ways to bring it back and you don't know how to. So we spent a lot of time trying to take money out of banks. We didn't know how to put it back in, and the banks didn't know how to put it back in. So suddenly there's a...
But if you took it out, then it had to go somewhere, right?
Yeah, so sometimes we actually moved it to a different bank, right? So we moved it from bank number 1 to bank number 2, and now we have money in bank number 2 just to show bank number 1 that we can steal their money. So then we say, okay, you got the point, you proved your point, here's your check for doing the service, now bring it back. And the other bank says, we don't have a system that allows us to move $2 million in one transaction. There's no system for that. You either have to hack our bank and move it the other way.
They said, please hack our bank to send...
or I don't know, we can do it over the next 10 years across small transactions. And said, no, this is so things like that. This was one type of anecdote that happened often, that we basically find flaws that there was no way to fix because the system doesn't work. We also had personal events that were very funny and kind of surreal at the time. I think that starting from ones where we actually had to break into banks ourselves, physically go and steal money from the bank. Forget about hacking, just go and steal the money to show that...
Back up, I don't understand. If you're a hacker, why would you have to physically break into a bank to steal money?
So hackers, in their mandate, get more than just to show that you can move money electronically, but they also are asked to do things like find flaws in their systematic security. So maybe this guy reports to this person, but this person is only there for a certain amount of hours, and if you imitate this guy, you can actually get this guy to give you a password, all kinds of complex things. This was in our job.
And you were doing this under contract for the banks.
Yeah, it's usually, I mean, we called it active marketing because sometimes we first did something bad and then came to the bank and said, look, we have a problem in your bank, please hire us.
So at that time, you were doing what you called active marketing, which would be to go in and infiltrate a bank and then let them know about it, and then they would hire you.
Yeah.
And today, you are now a professor of marketing at the Kellogg School of Management. So you've actually been doing this stuff.
Marketing forever.
So what's something during your hacker days that you really didn't see coming?
I think one of the anecdotes that I often find amusing still, and it's amusing, but at the same time really kind of unusual and telling about the world, is one where we hacked into the Israeli equivalent of the IRS.
Okay.
And they have a big database with everyone's names.
The tax system of Israel.
Yeah. Everyone's names, age, date of birth, profession, whatever. They have a lot of information about you. We hack into their system with their agreement, with their...
Okay.
And as we get in, we're trying to demonstrate to them that we can do things, we can change things. And they say, well, just demonstrate that you can do something small and then come back to us. One of the things we did, my team did, was they killed me.
They registered you as dead.
Yeah, there's one flag there that says like alive, 1. And
Which is really just a binary 0, 1. Right?
Yeah. IRS, database, first name, last name, profession, age. One of the fields there is a flag that says that you're alive. I change it back to 0, you're no longer alive, and this allows the system to make sure that
you're now officially dead according to the government.
So my team does it to me. They want to show that we can hack into the system. They change my echo just to demonstrate the point, demonstrate we can actually change the point, bring it back to 1. Everyone thinks it's going to be okay. Turns out that no one in the world thought that you can come back to life after you die. So even though
there was no way to put it back to 1.
They change it, you put it back to 1, but it doesn't matter. But the system already kind of registers and fits into the entire country's systems that you're dead. So suddenly, insurance kicks in, and you get flowers from companies that just get notified about people dying and try to capitalize on your tombstone.
Yeah.
A lot. So my parents start getting a lot of letters, condolences, and really.
So how did they end up solving the problem?
We had to go to court. So it turns out that the only way in Israel to change something in the database is to have a judge rule that you can change someone's records. And we had a judge rule, and the ruling was just to do one thing that was mechanical, which is create another record for me. So right now, if you
new record.
Yeah, because there wasn't, the changing it back didn't matter. What they had to do is they had to create a new person identical to me. So there actually are 2. I think I'm the only person in Israel right now that has 2 identical records in the database. Just one.
I'm sure there are other people who have 2 records, but maybe not 2 identical records. Great. So that's fantastic. Now, you had a very successful career as a white hat. Would it be hopefully safe to call you a white hat hacker? And you decided at some point to make a change. Why?
So I think I tell my students that asking people to tell a story is always going to get you a false answer, because they're going to come up somehow with an answer that goes back, but I'll give you my trigger points. I think that to me the main points were that one was financial. The company that I was at was just being acquired. We did well, and it was a long enough time to do that, which was a time where people kind of start evaluating their life anyhow. So I was ready to change.
Great.
And then at the same time, I met Francis Crick, the guy who is known as the Nobel laureate who discovered how DNA works, along with Watson. And he was now in his 80s, and he met me randomly. And he talked to me about my career at the time as a hacker, and he said, oh my God, this is what I used to do during World War II. I was a hacker, his was more radio signal hacking, but he said when the war is over, me and all the people who worked in the same job as me as hackers in the 50s and 40s, went to academia and did marvelous things. We explained how the DNA works, or discovered mathematical equations that changed the world, got the Nobel Prizes for many things. So he says, we did amazing jobs after being hackers in the 40s. In academia, you should do the same. If you know how to break into computers, you should go and apply to the ultimate machine in the world.
So in a sense, Francis Crick was the messenger RNA for your career DNA.
Exactly right.
Wow, it doesn't get any more bizarre than that. And fantastic, I might add.
Once you have a recommendation letter from Francis Crick, you can go to any school you want. So I think life becomes easy, like when you have Francis Crick as as the person who says, take this guy. So everything became very easy also.
And so you went to Caltech, is that right?
Yeah.
Great. So why neuroscience?
So I think that his logic, and I think I agree with that, was that hackers, what they are good at is taking a black box that you don't know anything about from the inside, feeding inputs into it, seeing what comes out, and learning somehow how it works. And this very much works like the brain. Like, we don't really know how the brain works from the inside. Even if we poke into one, there's too many things there to understand. What we can do easily is give you chocolate and see what happened to your saliva molecules. We can show you a picture and see how your heart rate goes up or down. So we can actually learn about your brain by the inputs and outputs that go. And that's why it's so easy. And also, programming is really key to the fields, hacking and neuroscience. Statistics is really key. Knowing how systems work. It was very kind of easy transition.
So it rather than a black box, it's maybe more of a gray box.
It is a gray box.
But today, neuroscience what you do is actually allowing us to see inside the gray box of functional magnetic resonance imaging and other technologies. What's something that in your career so far has surprised you about neuroscience? Something you didn't expect, something that occurred, an insight you've had, anything?
So I think that there are a few, and I can give you the most recent one. I grew up as a neuroscientist from the very basic training I took as an undergrad to a professor, thinking that the brain is kind of like a fixed machine in the sense that what you put in and gets locked in is in. I always knew that, you know, it's a big system and everything is moving and plastic and changing, but in a way I felt that our memories are there. Like if you had an experience, it's now in your brain. If you have a decision that you made, it's solid, like you made a decision. And now we know that this is not even true, that even our very basic ingredients are moving and changing and not reliable to the point that I can implant a memory in your brain and change your memories. I can go into your dreams and change something, and you wake up and you're going to have a different experience. So we can't rely on anything. I think the brain is, to our surprise, not as reliable as we thought it is. It's really like a fluid machine that computes things all the time, but it's not really fixed.
So the brain is not reliable not only for us as individuals accessing our brain, but also for you as a researcher trying to see what's going on by looking at electrical impulses and comparing it to inputs and outputs.
Exactly. So computers...
So it's a hard thing to study.
Exactly. I was going to say that exactly that with computers, at least you can assume that two identical kind of inputs will yield two identical outputs. Like you can repeat the experiment twice and get... With the brain, it's not the case. Like time changes, temperature changes, lighting changes. All of those can lead the brain to behave totally differently. And it's becoming really, really hard to study, also beautiful. That's kind of the beauty of it. Like you can expect different things.
So you're not going to be surprised by me asking you to do this because you've told this story many times. It's time to tell it again. Recording dreams. Just to give everybody some background, you were quite well known for making some comments, doing some research about how we access what's going on in people's minds while they're dreaming. Even to the extent that Chris Nolan, I think, who created Inception, the movie Inception, contacted you thinking that you could record dreams, and he wanted to know about it. Tell us about this journey to what might be known as the Ig Nobel Prize.
So it started with a scientific paper that came out. It was very serious and very remarkable, looking at the work I've been doing for years before that and showing that we can put electrodes in people's brains, find memories inside their head, and then have them think about things that activate those memories, and eventually we can project on the screen their memories.
So wait, stop for a second, Moran. What you just articulated was a hypothesis about how you think we might be able to understand what's going on in someone's brain, and you wanted to explore that as a possibility. Is that correct?
The opposite. This was the most almost like a plumbing machine in the brain. So what we did is I worked with patients who undergo brain surgery. During the surgery, we open their brain. This is the most mechanical it could be, the most technical. Open their brain when they're awake and stick electrodes inside their head to actually fix the problem they have. Leave the wires inside their head for a few days while we try to figure out what's going on with them and have those wires record their brain activity.
And these patients are awake, asleep, they're
everything. So
for a number of days.
A number of days. They have usually the typical case would be a person that has a brain disorder like epilepsy.
I see.
That you want to identify the source inside their head. For that, you have to have electrodes in their brain, and you have to have them go through a seizure, so you can actually see what parts start.
And they've obviously all approved your research.
They're all volunteers. We don't look for anyone in the audience to volunteer.
Okay,
great. So these people have a problem, and we try to fix the problem. In the course of fixing the problem, we also tell the guy, you know, you're going to be here for the next 2 weeks with electrodes in your brain, waiting to have a seizure, so you can actually see where the seizure's onset is. In the meantime, do you mind also having me show you pictures or talking to you about your feelings and behavior and learning how your brain works? The person says yes. We spend a few days talking to them, and at some point when we see them talking about their mother, this cell lights up. I say, oh my God, this is the cell that keeps coming up every time you mention your mom. So maybe it's the cell that codes your mother. And then we talk to you about your father, and this cell lights up, and we see this is the cell that probably codes your memory of your father. And we start doing that enough until we find enough of those cells that we can decode. Meaning every time I think about something, I know.
Just to digress for a moment, what you're finding in terms of these locations in the brain where activity is going on, To what extent is that transferable knowledge between humans? Or does it vary significantly between brains?
So it depends on what level you zoom in or out. So all of our memories, you and I, are sitting in the same location in the brain,
Okay.
but they're organized totally differently. So your mom is sitting here and my dad is sitting here, and within the area that we call memory area, the inside structure is very, very chaotic. And we don't know how it's organized yet. We can't find any logic to it.
Great.
But where you see and where I see is the same place. Where you hear and when you hear and I hear is the same place. So within the brain kind of functionally has big organizations, but within those it's very, very different. So we find memories in the patient's brains, and then we can also have the patient just sit there, think about their mothers. We see that the cells light up, and we show a picture of their mom on the screen. This is what we did. This is the study that we did. It was pretty remarkable and unusual and very profound, and it was about to be published in a very high-profile journal when I made a little video that explains the results and how it was done, because it was so complex and I wanted to make sure people understand. And the video ends with a very uplifting message about the future, and the last sentence of the video suggests that in the future we may be able to record people's intentions, feelings, and maybe their dreams. In just this one sentence.
So this is speculation that you based on the research, but it's speculation.
Very speculative, nothing that we did. Just this sentence, because it's the last one, because people care so much about dreams and they find it so fascinating, gets a huge following. And when the video comes out, there's basically a turnaround in the world where this becomes the #1 story in most science news out there, with commentaries and articles about that. And basically the world turns on and cares a lot about dreams, and we see why. Dreams are so meaningful, so that's not surprising. This became chaos. So as much as I try to tell everyone that it's not true that dream recording is possible, and I definitely didn't do that, no one cared anymore. Apple wanted
No one cared what the reality was.
Yeah.
They cared what the story was.
Yeah. And the story was remarkable, and it's so fascinating that I was an anecdote. A person who claims it's impossible doesn't matter anymore. Now everyone wants a hero who can record our dreams. So the Inception movie came out, and I was suddenly the face of Inception. And the famous chef wanted me to explain how I can look at his brain and extract recipes that he's dreaming about. And a lot of spouses called me to look at their husband or
wife's dreams
and tell me what's going on. So this was, I was a hero or a villain, depends on what side of science you sit, for a while. Unfortunately, this story dies because in the US they had the midterm election 2010, and in England Prince William proposed to his girlfriend. Those two stories were much more important.
Overtook the story.
So I was able to move on, but what was interesting, and I think this is why I think it's still relevant, was that this was 2010, so 7 years ago. This is the story that destroyed my academic career for 10 days, but fortunately died in of itself. 3 years after, I get a call again from BBC, who were really prompting the story early on and asking me again about dream recording, and I say, guys, you know it's impossible. You know that's not something people can do. I already told you that. And
you were trying to be clear and disavow people of the notion that we cannot record dreams.
And as I said
to the BBC.
To the BBC. As I say that, the guy from BBC says, but I don't understand. There's a paper that just came out a few days ago that shows how it can be done. So the answer was that someone in Japan did not know that when I spoke about that I didn't really do that. So they followed up on my work. And they were the first guys to actually record people's dreams. So now, 7 years after, I was talking to everyone and explaining how dream recording is impossible. This is what we do in my lab. So now, 7 years after, all we do is look at people's dreams, record them, visualize them. So if you want to take a kind of a message from this story, it's not that my mistake wasn't in saying something was impossible in theory in a movie and then letting it kind of expand beyond control. It's that I actually spend time telling people that something is impossible before knowing this is the case, because turns out I was wrong twice. It was impossible when I said it was, and it was possible when I said it was impossible. So now it's what we do. So in a way, I think the message here that dreams are penetrable, and also that I should have been more careful in saying something is impossible before I knew it for sure.
I think, Moran, it's also quite a challenge to the global scientific and hacker community to throw out a comment that says X, Y, Z is impossible. Somebody's going to go out and try and figure out how to make it possible.
I'm not going to make this mistake again. I'm never going to make this mistake. Now I'm always going to use like fluffy words.
Hedging words,
exactly.
Like perhaps, one would think. Yeah. Great. So what is one challenge that you see for neuroscience that if we could overcome it, could truly change the world?
I think that Psychologically, there's one, and mechanically, there's one. So I'll give you both quickly. The mechanical one is that we didn't yet find a way to connect machines to the brains mechanically. We know how to read, we know how to write, but every time we try to put something in your brain, machines fail. The brain fights it, there's inflammation. We didn't find yet a mechanical way to do that. Once we do that, we'll be able to integrate the two. And everyone wants that. Right. Everyone thinks that integration between machine and humans is kind of the next step. And we know how to do all the steps but the biological connection, and this is a mechanical one.
What you and I have been calling the invisible interface.
Exactly right. So we missed this one.
I have a thought, and it is directly transferred to the computing system, and perhaps vice versa.
And permanently. So we know how to read for a day, but then afterwards the brain becomes like opponent to that. And that's it. We no longer do it. So we know how to do some reading, some writing, but not really chronically put something in your brain that your brain lives with as part of it. That's a mechanical one that I think we should solve. Once we do that, a lot of things are going to change that we right now miss. The psychological aspect that we didn't overcome yet is, and I'm trying to frame it in a, it's hard for me to explain, but I'm going to try my best, is the understanding that we're not really important. What I mean by that is that in our brain, there are more than one entity that is us sitting and thinking, and we speak in the voice of one of those entities, and we think this is all we are, but it's not. We have many, many characters, many Robs sitting in your brain and vying for dominance and arguing what you're going to say, what you're going to do. Eventually, one of them wins, they have a vote, and they kind of arrive at a coalition, and the majority decides we're going to do something, and you listen to this speaker, and you think this is everyone. You never realize that there's more than one entity in your brain. Because we don't really think like that, it's hard for us to study free will or volition, because we always think that what we did is what we wanted to do, and we can't really understand the gaps between the desires and the outcomes. And this is so kind of profound to our existence to believe that we are uniform, that it is a psychological exercise that we can't bypass. And accordingly, a lot of the research stops there, because every time we find an understanding that says that actually how you decide is not really how you think you decide, we pause and we fight that. Once we accept the fact that we're not really in the center of our brain, I think we're going to have an easy time studying it better.
So, a very important question. You work with film and TV as a consultant on a fairly regular basis. Which is better, Star Wars or Star Trek, and why?
I think that Star Trek is better. It changes. So Star Wars tells you about one kind of era, and it's basically the story of a beautiful story and of like a lot of politics, but it's staying in the same domain. It's less about the people, it's more about the science fiction. Star Trek is about people, their emotions, their feeling, how they change. I think that there's a big difference between version 1, version 2.
Yeah.
The changes are so profound, it evolves with the society. Like, I think it's really relevant even now.
Much better, Star Trek. Congratulations, you are correct. 3 words for describing the experience of being a scientist. 3 words for describing the experience of being a scientist. Hyphens are acceptable.
I think curiosity, failure, and ignorance.
Curiosity, failure, and ignorance. Why ignorance?
I think that the faster you are to understand that you're ignorant, the better you are in being a scientist. And I think that also the best science comes with taking something that you're really in awe towards, because you don't know anything about, and asking basic questions. Like, if you think I know so much about neuroscience, I'm not going to ask this question because I'm smart enough, you're going to miss something. The best questions come from kids who really don't know anything, and they ask trivial questions and say, oh, actually, that's a good question. I think this ignorance is really helpful.
So ignorance is truly more than bliss. Ignorance can lead to insight. Moran, thanks so much. You mentioned that all of us carry multiple entities or identities inside our head. Clearly, you carry many more than most of us inside your head. We also carry society around with us all the time in our reactions to things. What might look like a fixed machine, the human being, the human mind, actually, in fact, is very plastic and evolves and changes, not just through generations, but even through moments. And how we connect the brain and our evolving technology and each other will have a fundamental impact on our ignorance and our enlightenment in the future. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.